Stop for a moment. If you have arthritis or osteoarthritis and you're eating certain everyday foods without thinking twice, this video may explain why your joints feel stiffer, more swollen, or more painful than they should. Now, before you feel alarmed, let me be very clear. This is not a scare video. This is not a threat about your health. And this is certainly not about blaming you. It's simply a calm, honest conversation about something many people with joint pain experience, but few fully connect. You might recognize these signs: waking up with stiff fingers that take time to loosen, knees that feel tight and uncomfortable when you first stand, swelling that seems worse in the morning or after meals, pain that doesn't quite match how active you've been. Most people assume this is just age, or weather, or how arthritis works. But the body is rarely random. What many people don't realize is that some foods we've been told are healthy can quietly act like fuel on an already smoldering fire of inflammation inside the joints. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, day after day. And that's where confusion sets in. You might be doing everything right. Taking medication, following medical advice, trying to eat better, yet the pain persists. This video is not about curing arthritis. It does not replace medical treatment, and it does not promise miracles. What it does do is shine a light on three very common foods that can silently worsen joint inflammation. Foods that are often sitting in kitchen cupboards, disguised as sensible choices. Once you understand this connection, something important changes. You stop feeling helpless. You stop blaming your body, and you start making informed, calm decisions that support your joints rather than aggravate them. Let's start there, with awareness, not fear. To understand why certain foods can worsen joint pain, we need to talk about inflammation, not as a medical buzzword, but as something very practical that happens inside the body every day. Inflammation doesn't stay neatly in one place. It doesn't only sit in the gut. It doesn't only circulate in the blood. When inflammation is triggered repeatedly, it travels. And joints are one of the first places it settles, especially joints already affected by arthritis or wear and tear. One of the key drivers is blood sugar. When certain foods cause rapid spikes in blood sugar, the body responds by releasing inflammatory messengers called cytokines. These chemicals don't ask where to go. They move through the bloodstream and often end up in vulnerable tissues, including cartilage and joint lining. Another important piece is the gut. Highly processed foods can irritate the gut lining over time, creating what's often called a leaky gut. This allows tiny inflammatory particles to pass into the bloodstream, keeping the immune system on constant low-level alert. The result is not dramatic illness, but persistent inflammation, the kind that makes joints feel stiff, swollen, and slow to recover. This explains two very common patterns many people notice but rarely connect. Why joint pain is often worst in the morning. Inflammation builds quietly overnight when the body is still. And why pain can worsen after meals. Certain foods act as triggers, increasing inflammatory signals within hours. None of this means food causes arthritis, but it does mean food can strongly influence how intense symptoms feel from day to day. Once you see inflammation as a system, not a single problem, the picture becomes much clearer. And from here we can talk calmly about the real issue. Not everything you eat, but three very common foods that quietly drive this process forward. Let's start with the food ingredient that surprises most people: Not because it's rare, but because it's everywhere. Maltodextrin. If that word sounds technical or harmless, that's exactly the point. Maltodextrin is a highly processed carbohydrate made from starch, usually corn, rice, wheat, or potatoes. It doesn't taste sweet, so most people never think of it as sugar. But inside the body, it behaves almost exactly like refined sugar. It is absorbed extremely fast. It causes sharp blood sugar spikes, and those spikes trigger inflammatory messengers called cytokines. These cytokines don't stay in the gut, they circulate through the bloodstream and often end up in joints, especially joints already sensitive from arthritis. This is why some people notice a very specific pattern. Joints feel stiffer. The morning after certain foods, swelling seems worse. After snacks or breakfast, pain increases shortly after eating, even without movement. Maltodextrin also affects the gut in another important way. Over time, it can damage the gut lining, weakening the barrier that normally keeps inflammatory particles out of the bloodstream. This contributes to what's commonly called leaky gut. Not a dramatic illness, but a constant low-grade inflammatory state. That ongoing inflammation doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up quietly as stiffness, swelling, and slower recovery. What makes maltodextrin especially frustrating is where it hides. You'll find it in foods marketed as healthy: granola bars, protein bars, instant oatmeal, breakfast cereals, low-fat, or energy snacks. It rarely appears under the word sugar. Instead, it's listed as maltodextrin, dextrin, dextrose, modified starch. Most people have seen these words dozens of times and never been told what they mean. This isn't about blame. It's about information that was never clearly explained. Food companies use maltodextrin because it's cheap, improves texture, and extends shelf life. It makes products feel creamy, filling, and satisfying, while quietly fueling inflammation. For someone without joint issues, the effects may be subtle. For someone with arthritis, the impact is often much more noticeable. And this is the first real moment of clarity. Not "I've failed," but "I was never given the full picture." And as important as this is to understand, it's only the beginning. Because as damaging as maltodextrin can be, it's not the worst offender. The next food is even more widespread. And almost everyone is cooking with it every single day without realizing what it's doing to their joints. For years, many of us were told something very simple. Vegetable oils are better. Animal fats are bad. Use sunflower oil, corn oil, soybean oil. They're heart healthy. And most people followed that advice with good intentions. The problem isn't fat itself. And it's not even the plants these oils come from. The real issue is the industrial process used to turn seeds into oil. Industrial vegetable oils are extracted using extreme heat, chemical solvents, and heavy refining. They are deodorized, bleached, and processed until almost nothing of the original plant remains. What's left is a highly unstable fat that the body struggles to handle. This matters because of something called omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-6 fats are not the enemy. Your body needs them in small amounts. But here's the part that's rarely explained clearly. Omega-6 and omega-3 fats compete for the same pathways in your body. They use the same enzymes. When omega-6 intake is very high and omega-3 is low, inflammation becomes the default setting. Think of it like two cars trying to enter a narrow tunnel. If one car is 20 times bigger and constantly pushing through, the other never gets a chance. Modern diets are overloaded with omega-6, mainly from industrial vegetable oils, while omega-3 intake has dropped sharply. This imbalance doesn't cause sudden pain. It creates low-grade chronic inflammation that quietly builds over time, and joints are one of the first places where that inflammation shows up. This is why joint pain often worsens gradually, not overnight feels stiffer in the morning flares, without a clear injury increases even when movement hasn't changed. What makes this especially tricky is where these oils hide. They're not just in the oil bottle you use at home. They're in bread crackers, chips, salad, dressings, sauces, soups, frozen and packaged meals. On labels, they usually appear as sunflower oil, corn oil, soybean oil, vegetable oil. Different names, same problem. The good news is this is one of the easiest changes to make. You don't need to overhaul your entire diet. Simply replacing industrial oils with more stable options, like extra virgin olive oil for low-heat cooking and dressings, or avocado oil for higher heat, can begin to shift that balance back. Many people notice less stiffness, reduced swelling joints, feeling calmer, not as reactive, not because they did something extreme, but because they stopped fueling inflammation without realizing it. And just when this starts to make sense, there's one more food category we need to talk about. It's not hidden behind technical names. It's openly celebrated. And for joints, it may be the most damaging of all. This is usually the part where people push back. Not bacon. Surely not bacon. I've eaten it my whole life. And that reaction makes complete sense. Bacon isn't just food. It's comfort. It's tradition. It's wrapped into breakfasts, memories, and routines. But to understand why bacon and processed meats can be so damaging for joints, we need to look beyond taste and into chemistry. Bacon isn't simply meat. Before it ever reaches your plate, it has already been cured with nitrites and nitrates, artificially smoked, treated with preservatives, colored to look appetizing. Then comes the cooking. Most people like bacon crispy, golden, slightly burnt. And that's where a major problem appears. When animal proteins and fats are cooked at high temperatures, especially frying, grilling, or charring, they form compounds called AGEs, advanced glycation, end products. Instead of thinking of AGEs as a scientific term, imagine this. They're like tiny bits of burnt residue that don't just stay on the food. They enter your body. Once inside, AGEs attach themselves to tissues, especially collagen-rich tissues, like cartilage, tendons, and joints. They make these tissues stiffer, less flexible, and more inflamed. It's not dramatic, it's not immediate. But many people with arthritis notice something very specific: swollen fingers. The morning after joints that feel rusty stiffness that's worse than usual, and they rarely connect it to what they ate the day before. Bacon is one of the richest dietary sources of AGEs. But it's not alone. This applies to all processed meats, including sausages, hot dogs, deli, meats, ham, salami, pepperoni. If the meat needs preservatives to last, is smoked or cured industrially, comes pre-packaged and ready to heat, it's likely contributing to inflammatory load. Now here's the part that matters most. This is not about never eating bacon again. It's about frequency and awareness. When processed meats are eaten occasionally, the body can usually manage. When they're eaten regularly, especially alongside refined carbs and industrial oils, inflammation compounds, that's when joints start reacting. Many people feel relief, not because they eliminated everything, but because they reduced how often they were quietly adding fuel to the fire. Understanding this changes the conversation. It's no longer about guilt. It's about choice. And once you see how food can either irritate or calm your joints, something shifts. Because now, instead of guessing why your body hurts, you finally have an explanation that makes sense. At this point, many people start thinking, so, what can I eat now? That question matters, because good information should leave you feeling empowered, not restricted. The good news is, you don't need exotic superfoods or expensive supplements. Some of the most effective anti-inflammatory foods are simple, familiar, and easy to use. Let's start with ginger. Ginger works at a very basic level of inflammation. It helps calm inflammatory pathways and improves circulation to tissues, including joints. When used regularly, even in small amounts, many people notice less morning stiffness and a gentler start to the day. You can grate fresh ginger into soups, add it to tea, stir it into meals, or blend it into smoothies. Consistency matters far more than quantity. Next is turmeric, used the right way. Turmeric's active compound, curcumin, has well-studied anti-inflammatory and pain-modulating effects. But turmeric only works when it's absorbed properly. That means two things. It needs a small amount of fat and a pinch of black pepper. Used this way, turmeric doesn't just reduce inflammation. It can also help calm pain signaling in the nervous system. Add it at the end of cooking, not the beginning, or mix it with olive oil in warm dishes or drinks. Finally, fatty fish and omega-3s. Salmon, sardines, and mackerel provide omega-3 fatty acids that help rebalance the inflammatory load created by modern diets. Omega-3s don't work overnight, but when eaten 2 to 3 times per week, they steadily reduce joint inflammation and support mobility. And here's the key message. You don't need high doses. You don't need perfection. Regular, gentle inclusion beats occasional extremes. When people make these small, steady swaps, their joints often respond with less swelling, less stiffness, and more ease of movement. Without stress, fear, or food rules, and that's how change becomes sustainable. At this point, I want to make one thing very clear. You don't need to change everything. You don't need to be perfect, and you don't need to overhaul your entire kitchen overnight. Real improvement comes from small, intentional steps. That's why I often suggest a simple 14-day challenge. For the next 2 weeks, choose just one of the 3 foods we talked about. Maltodextrin, heavy packaged snacks, industrial vegetable oils, or processed meats, and remove only that one. No guilt, no extremes. Replace it gently. Swap vegetable oil for extra virgin olive oil, swap packaged snacks for nuts, and fruit swap bacon for eggs, fish, or whole foods. That's it. One change. Then notice how your body responds, especially your morning stiffness, swelling, and overall joint comfort. Joint pain is not a personal failure, and it's not simply your age. For many people, food is the strongest lever they have to reduce inflammation and regain movement without fear or pressure. If this conversation helped you, I'd love for you to leave a comment telling me which change you'll start with, like the video, so others can find it. And subscribe if you want more calm, evidence-based conversations like this. We'll keep going, slowly, clearly, and always, with respect for the body you're living in now.